My name is Alara Vance. For most of my 36 years, I have felt like a tide pool, a small, separate world existing at the edge of a much larger, more turbulent ocean. My ocean was my family. I was born and raised in Port Blossom, a small town nestled on the Oregon coast where the fog hangs heavy in the Douglas firs and the scent of salt and damp earth is a constant companion. It's a place of breathtaking, moody beauty, but its horizons can feel confining if you're not looking in the right direction. My son, Leo, who is 8 now, is the sun that warms my little world. He has my curious eyes, but a spirit entirely his own, bright and uncluttered by the past. We live a quiet life in Portland, an hour's drive from the coast, in a modest bungalow with a small garden where we grow heirloom tomatoes and sprawling zucchini vines. To my family, I was the daughter who drifted. The one who went to college for art history, came home pregnant with no husband in sight, and seemed to make a life out of patching things together. They saw my freelance graphic design work as a quaint hobby, my quiet nature as a lack of ambition. I was the gentle disappointment, the one they loved with a sigh. Our family gatherings were always held at my parents' house in Port Blossom. It's a classic cedar-shingled home perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, with wide windows that stare out at the relentless gray waves. Inside, it's a museum of our family's perceived successes. Polished oak floors, a grand stone fireplace, and shelves filled with my brother Daniel's academic awards and sports trophies. My father, Richard, a man carved from the same stoic timber as the coastal pines, and my mother, Carol, whose warmth was often a buffer against his rigid expectations, had built a life on the foundation of appearances. Last autumn, we gathered not for a holiday, but for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The occasion felt heavy with unspoken significance, a testament to endurance that I was implicitly failing to replicate. Daniel and his wife, Sophie, had come up from San Francisco. They were the portrait of success my parents had always envisioned. Daniel, a partner at a prestigious law firm. Sophie, elegant and composed, with a life curated for social media. Their children, 7-year-old Chloe and 5-year-old Noah, were perfectly dressed and unnervingly quiet. The air in the house was thick with the scent of my mother's roast chicken and the faint, ever-present aroma of sea salt and wood smoke. But beneath it, there was a familiar undercurrent of tension. It was in the way my mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way my father's answers to my questions were clipped monosyllables, the way Daniel and Sophie exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. We sat down for an early dinner, the long oak table set with the good silver and my mother's wedding china. Leo, scrubbed clean and wearing a new sweater, was seated between me and his grandmother, carefully navigating his plate. I tried to anchor myself in his small presence, in the earnest way he told my mother about the book he was reading about whales. "That's nice, dear," she said, patting his hand before her eyes darted anxiously toward my father at the head of the table. The conversation was a carefully constructed edifice. Sophie spoke of their recent trip to Italy, describing ancient villas and Tuscan sunsets. Daniel recounted a major victory in court, his voice full of the easy confidence I'd always envied. I tried to contribute, sharing a story about a community garden project I was volunteering for in Portland, describing the satisfaction of pulling the first radishes from the soil. My father made a noncommittal grunting sound. "Farming," he said, his tone dismissing it as some frivolous pastime. "Still haven't found a real career, have you, Alara?" The words were a small, familiar sting. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my voice even. "I enjoy it, Dad. And my design work is going well." He waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "A little here, a little there. It's not a life. A woman your age, a child to think of, you should have a plan. Stability." He looked pointedly at Daniel. "Your brother has stability." "Richard, please," my mother murmured, her hands fluttering in her lap like trapped birds. "It's our anniversary." But the dam had been breached. The polite facade crumbled, and the raw, unvarnished judgment I had felt my whole life came flooding out. My father pushed his chair back slightly, his gaze fixed on me, his face hardening. "I just don't understand it," he said, his voice rising, gathering a force that silenced the table. Chloe and Noah looked down at their plates, suddenly still. Leo's hand found mine under the table, his small fingers gripping me tightly. We gave you every opportunity. The best schools, a good home. And what did you do with it? You come back with no degree to speak of, a baby, and no husband. You live hand to mouth in that little house, playing in the dirt. It's an embarrassment. Each word landed like a stone. I could feel every eye at the table on me, but I refused to look at anyone but my father. His face was flushed, his disappointment a palpable thing in the room. Daniel builds a life we can be proud of, he continued, his voice echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. He respects what this family stands for. And you just drift. You bring this instability into our lives every time you walk through that door. When are you going to grow up and take some responsibility for your life? I looked at my mother, a silent plea in my eyes. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She was staring at a small gravy stain on the tablecloth, her entire being focused on this tiny imperfection, willing the larger one to disappear. Daniel cleared his throat, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face, but he said nothing. He picked up his wine glass and studied its contents as if it held the secrets to the universe. In their silence, they were his accomplices. A strange calm washed over me. The pain was there, a deep, ancient ache, but something else was rising alongside it, a quiet, unyielding clarity. I thought of all the years I had absorbed their disappointment, believing it was a reflection of my own worthlessness. I thought of the secrets I kept, the burdens I carried for them without a word of acknowledgement. The house they were sitting in, with its polished floors and panoramic views. The very funds that had paid for Daniel's law school and Sophie's Italian vacation. The custom-built sailboat my father bragged about to his golf partners, a boat he believed was a savvy investment from his pension. They had no idea. They had never once cared enough to ask. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Frankly, I've had enough. I don't want you here, bringing your failures into my home, until you've figured out how to be a respectable member of this family. So you can leave. The finality of it was absolute. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an excommunication. Slowly, I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. My legs felt strangely steady. My voice, when it came, was quiet, devoid of the tremor I felt in my soul. All right, I said. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. It was not a plea or an argument. It was an acceptance. I turned to Leo, whose eyes were wide and glistening with unshed tears. I gave him a small, reassuring smile, though my heart was fracturing. Come on, sweet pea, I whispered, helping him from his chair. It's time for us to go. I scooped him into my arms, his small body clinging to mine, his face buried in my shoulder. He was confused and scared, and my only mission was to shield him from the shrapnel of my family's implosion. I walked to the hall closet, my movements deliberate and unhurried. I pulled on our coats, zipped up his, and picked up my purse. No one moved. No one spoke. The scent of roast chicken and betrayal filled the air. As I opened the front door, the cold, damp wind of the Oregon coast hit my face, a bracing slap of reality. I walked across the porch, my boots making a hollow sound on the weathered wood, and down the steps to my car parked in the gravel driveway. I buckled Leo into his car seat, his favorite stuffed otter clutched in his hand. Before getting in myself, I took one last look at the house, its windows glowing with a warm, artificial light. And in that moment, a profound realization settled over me. I wasn't heartbroken. I was liberated. The entire world they inhabited, the security, the pride, the very roof over their heads, was a fiction they believed, a stage set I had built and maintained for years. It was all financed by my failure, my quaint hobby, my quiet, unassuming life. It was all paid for by the $87 million fortune I had built, an empire so vast and successful they couldn't even conceive of it. As I started the engine and pulled away from the home that had never truly been mine, I felt the weight of a lifetime of not being enough begin to lift. That day, on what should have been a celebration of family, I learned that sometimes the most loving act you can perform for yourself is to walk away from a family that refuses to see you. They didn't know me. They had never even tried. And for the first time, I understood that it wasn't my loss. It was theirs. The truth is, I had learned to live a double life not out of a desire for deception, but as a form of self-preservation. My ambition was a delicate, growing thing, and I knew instinctively that my family's world, with its harsh winds of judgment and its narrow definitions of success, would have uprooted it before it had a chance to bloom. So I nurtured it in secret, in the quiet hours after Leo was asleep, in the stolen moments between motherhood and survival. It began 8 years ago, not in a boardroom, but on the floor of my cramped Portland apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and the overwhelming reality of my new life as a single mother. I was 28, heartbroken and terrified. I had a few $1,000s in savings and a deep, gnawing fear of becoming the cautionary tale my father always predicted I would be. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my cheap kitchen table with a borrowed laptop and an idea that felt both ludicrous and life-saving. I loved art. I loved the story behind handmade things, the touch of a human hand in an increasingly digital world. I saw a gap in the market for a beautifully curated online space that celebrated independent artisans, potters, weavers, jewelers, woodworkers from the Pacific Northwest and beyond. A place that valued soul over mass production. I called it the Larkspur Collective. Larkspurs, with their tall, elegant spires of intricate blossoms, had always seemed to me to be quietly resilient. I spent a month teaching myself how to build a website, watching hours of tutorials, my eyes burning from the screen's glare while Leo slept in a bassinet beside me. I drove my old Subaru up and down the coast, visiting farmers markets and small-town art fairs, convincing artisans to trust me with their work. I wrote every product description, took every photograph, and packed every single one of the first orders myself, adding a handwritten thank you note to each. The first year was a grueling exercise in faith. There were days I made only $20. I ate toast for dinner, stretched every diaper, and fought off the constant temptation to call my parents and admit defeat. The only thing that kept me going was the quiet hum of purpose I felt when I was working. It was mine. For the first time in my life, I was building something that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. Then, slowly, a shift. A well-known design blogger in Seattle discovered the site and wrote a glowing feature. The post went viral overnight. My little website, run from a corner of my living room, was flooded with orders. I reinvested every penny. I hired a part-time assistant, a college student who worked from her dorm room. I upgraded the website's platform. I expanded our reach, seeking out artists from across the country, focusing on ethical sourcing and sustainable practices. The Larkspur Collective became known for its quality and its story. We weren't just selling objects, we were selling connection. Within 3 years, we were no longer a small passion project. We were a phenomenon. I was approached by a major home decor chain that wanted to carry our products. I negotiated a partnership that maintained our brand's integrity while giving us national exposure. Then came the international interest. A luxury hotel group in Japan wanted to furnish their suites with our artisan textiles. A Michelin-starred restaurant in Copenhagen commissioned a line of our hand-thrown ceramics. I flew to Tokyo and Copenhagen for meetings, telling my family I was attending design conferences for freelance work. I wore simple, unassuming clothes and never spoke of my role as the founder and CEO. I let them assume I was a mid-level employee. It was easier. The cognitive dissonance of me, their drifting, aimless daughter, being a powerful, successful businesswoman was too much for them, and frankly, too much for me to deal with. My net worth grew exponentially, reaching a staggering $87 million. I would sometimes look at the numbers on my private banking portal and feel a sense of profound disbelief. Yet, on the surface, my life remained unchanged. I still drove my 10-year-old Subaru. I still shopped at the local grocery store. My greatest luxuries were a good cup of coffee and a new book. But I used the money. I used it to create a wall of security around the very people who saw me as a liability. 7 years ago, when my father's small business failed and they were on the verge of losing their home, I created a shell corporation, Northwood Holdings, and bought the house outright, setting up a trust to pay the property taxes and utilities indefinitely. I told my lawyer to send them a letter from the firm, explaining that an anonymous benefactor from their church, inspired by my father's years of service as a deacon, had arranged it. My father, his pride salvaged, accepted it as his due. When Daniel was drowning in student loan debt from law school, I began funneling money to him through a scholarship fund I established under the same anonymous company. He never questioned the monthly checks that miraculously covered his payments. He just assumed he'd gotten lucky. Their vacations, their cars, the seamless comfort of their lives, I orchestrated it all from the shadows, the invisible engine humming beneath their world. Looking back, I know I enabled their ignorance. But I did it out of a complicated, messy love. I wanted them to be happy, and I didn't want my success to become another topic for them to analyze, criticize, or misunderstand. I wanted to give them a gift, not a weapon to be used against me. But after that anniversary dinner, as I tucked a sleeping Leo into his bed back in our quiet bungalow in Portland, the messy love had curdled into a cold, hard anger. His little face was still puffy from his silent tears in the car. He had been hurt by my family's cruelty, and that was a line I hadn't known existed until it was crossed. I sat down at my desk, the same one where I'd built my empire, and opened my laptop. My hands, which had been trembling earlier, were now perfectly steady. I logged into the administrative portal for Northwood Holdings. I looked at the list of scheduled payments, the mortgage trust for the Port Blossom house, the monthly stipend to Daniel's scholarship fund, the automatic transfers that covered my mother's credit card, the maintenance and insurance for my father's boat. Their entire, carefully constructed world, laid out in a series of sterile transactions. A world built on my work, my sleepless nights, my sacrifice. And in that world, I was still the failure. My finger hovered over the first entry. For years, I had been their silent protector. Their ghost. I realized, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that by hiding, I had allowed them to diminish me. My silence wasn't protecting them, it was protecting their prejudice. Slowly, methodically, I began to dismantle the architecture of their comfort. I canceled the recurring payments. I sent an email to my lawyer with a single instruction: dissolve Northwood Holdings and rescind all associated trusts and benefits, effective immediately. I called the private bank and had the credit cards linked to the family accounts deactivated. With each click, I felt not a sense of revenge, but of reclamation. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about choosing myself. It was about declaring, if only to the silent room and the sleeping city outside, that my worth was not negotiable. I would no longer pay for the privilege of being disrespected in my own family. When I was finished, I closed the laptop. The quiet in the house felt different now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but the silence of sovereignty. I looked at the drawings Leo had taped to the wall, vibrant splashes of color and imagination. This was my reality. This was my stability. This was the life I had built, not from a plan my father would recognize, but from the truest parts of myself. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never again make myself small to fit into their world. I would finally, fully, inhabit my own. The day after I dismantled my secret financial support system, I booked 2 one-way tickets to Kauai. I didn't know if we were running away or running towards something, but I knew we couldn't stay in Portland, so close to the gravitational pull of Port Blossom. I needed distance. I needed an ocean so vast it could swallow up the past. I needed to be in a place where the only history that mattered was the one I was about to create. I had bought a house there 2 years prior, a purchase I'd vaguely described to my family as a small investment property for the business. In truth, it was my sanctuary, my secret escape. It was a modern home, built of glass and warm koa wood, tucked away on a secluded stretch of sand near Honolulu Bay. Its back wall was a series of sliding glass doors that opened directly onto a lanai, with the turquoise Pacific stretching out to the horizon. It was a house designed to erase the boundaries between inside and out, a place of light and air and peace. Leo was drowsy and bewildered when we landed, but the moment we arrived at the house and he saw the ocean through the living room, his exhaustion vanished. "Mom, the beach is our backyard," he shouted, his voice filled with a pure, uncomplicated awe that felt like a balm on my bruised heart. His joy was an anchor, pulling me back to the present moment. He spent the first hour exploring, his bare feet padding on the cool stone floors, his laughter echoing in the high-ceilinged rooms. The first morning, we woke with the sun. I made coffee and we sat on the lanai in our pajamas, eating mangoes and toast. Leo was mesmerized by the waves, the constant, rhythmic shushing sound a world away from the tense silences of his grandparents' home. "Can we build the biggest sandcastle ever?" he asked, his eyes shining. "The biggest ever," I promised. We spent the morning on the sand. I watched as he dug with fierce concentration, his brow furrowed, his tongue poking out from the corner of his mouth. There was no one to impress, no one to perform for. There was only the warmth of the sun on my skin, the cool spray of the surf, and my son's happy, focused chatter. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the muscles in my shoulders began to unclench. I found myself smiling, a real, unforced smile that started from somewhere deep inside. In the afternoons, we explored. We found hidden waterfalls, hiked through lush rainforests that smelled of ginger blossoms and damp earth, and swam in quiet coves where sea turtles surfaced lazily in the clear water. I was rediscovering not just the world, but myself. I was not just a mother, not just a daughter, not just a CEO. I was Alara. A woman who loved the scent of plumeria on the night air, the taste of salt on her lips, the feeling of her own strength returning with every crashing wave. At night, after Leo was asleep, his hair smelling of sun and sea, I would sit on the lanai with a glass of wine and my laptop. The house was quiet save for the ocean's lullaby. Under the vast, star-dusted sky, I began to dream again, not of profit margins and market expansion, but of purpose. The idea had been a quiet seed in my mind for years, born from my own lonely, terrifying first months of motherhood. I remembered the profound isolation, the feeling that the world was not built for women like me, single mothers navigating a path without a map. I had been lucky. I had a skill and a desperate, driving ambition that had, against all odds, led to incredible success. But what about the women who weren't so lucky? With the sound of the waves as my soundtrack, I started to sketch out a plan. I would create a foundation. I wouldn't name it after myself. I wanted it to be about the women it served, not about me. I called it the Haven Project. Its mission would be simple, to provide a harbor for single mothers, offering the kind of support I had so desperately needed. It would offer grants for education and vocational training, funds for emergency childcare, legal aid services, and mentorship programs. It would be a place of empowerment, not pity. I emailed my wealth manager and my lawyers, instructing them to set up the foundation and endow it with an initial fund of $5 million. The act felt more meaningful than any business deal I had ever closed. This money, earned in silence and once used to prop up a family that didn't value me, would now be used to build new foundations for women who were starting over. It would be a legacy of hope, born from my own private pain. As I worked, drafting the mission statement and outlining the first programs, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The Larkspur Collective was my success, but the Haven Project would be my soul. It was the alchemy of turning my deepest wounds into a source of healing for others. Leo and I fell into a gentle rhythm. Our days were measured by the tides. We read books in a hammock strung between two palm trees. We learned the names of the tropical flowers in our garden. We really talked about everything and nothing. The house, once my secret, became our home. It filled with Leo's artwork, with collections of shells and smooth sea glass, with the sound of our shared laughter. The memory of that anniversary dinner still surfaced at times, a phantom ache in my chest. But here, in this place of staggering beauty and profound peace, the voices of my family began to fade. They were replaced by the steady, truthful whisper of the ocean, reminding me that I was part of something much larger and more ancient than their small, sad judgments. I didn't need their approval to be whole. I just needed this, my son's hand in mine, a purpose that lit me up from the inside, and the courage to finally, unapologetically, live a life of my own making. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks into our new life. The sun was a warm weight on the island, and the air was sweet with the scent of rain-washed hibiscus. I was in the kitchen, slicing a pineapple, while Leo hummed to himself on the lanai, drawing a colorful menagerie of sea creatures. The peaceful, domestic scene was so perfect it was almost fragile. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I saw the Port Blossom area code and my stomach tightened into a familiar knot. It was my mother. My first instinct was to ignore it, to protect the bubble of serenity I had so carefully cultivated. But then I looked at my hands, steady on the knife, and I knew I didn't have to hide anymore. I was no longer the frightened girl who flinched at her father's disapproval. I was a woman standing on her own ground. I answered the call. Alara? Honey, is that you? My mother's voice was thin, frayed at the edges. Her usual placid tone was gone, replaced by a high-strung panic. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice calm and even. Oh, thank God. Alara, something terrible has happened. The bank, they sent a foreclosure notice for the house. They said the payments have stopped. And your father's boat, they're going to repossess it. I don't understand. I thought everything was taken care of. Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush. And Daniel called. He's in a panic. The money for his loans, it's gone. Your father is, well, he's not handling it well. He's just sitting in his study, staring at the wall. We need your help. I listened, letting her words fall into the quiet space of my sunlit kitchen. Years ago, this call would have sent me spiraling. I would have felt the crushing weight of their problems as my own, my duty to rush in and fix everything, to smooth it all over and restore their comfort at the expense of my own. But the woman who had sat through that anniversary dinner was gone. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the scent of the pineapple and the sea. Mom, I said, my tone gentle but firm. I need you to listen to me very carefully. There was a pause on the other end. She must have heard the change in me, the absence of my usual rush to appease. The house, the boat, Daniel's loans, all of it. That was me, I said, the words falling calmly and clearly. For the past 7 years, I've been paying for everything. I bought the house when Dad's business failed. I paid for Daniel's education. I paid for your trips, the cars, the bills. It was all from me. The silence on the other end was absolute, so profound I could hear the faint static on the line. I could picture her standing in the kitchen of that house, her hand gripping the phone, her face a mask of confusion. I did it because I love you, I continued, my voice steady. I did it because I didn't want you to worry. But on your anniversary, when Dad told me I was an embarrassment, a failure, when all of you just sat there and let him, I realized something. I realized that my money could buy your comfort, but it couldn't buy your respect. And I deserve respect, Mom. My son deserves to see his mother treated with respect. I heard a small, choked sound. It was the sound of a sob, the kind of quiet, shattering grief I hadn't heard from her in years. Oh, Alara, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. We had no idea. I swear to you, we didn't know. I closed my eyes, a wave of old sadness washing over me before receding just as quickly. That's the point, Mom. You never asked. None of you ever looked at my life, at me, and asked how I was really doing. You just saw what you wanted to see. The single mother, the drifter, the disappointment. It was easier than trying to understand a life that didn't fit your plan. My voice softened. The anger had burned away, leaving only a clear, clean truth. I forgive you. But I can't go back. I can't be your silent benefactor anymore. I can't live in the shadows of my own life just to make everyone else feel comfortable. What do we do? She whispered, her voice small and lost. You figure it out, I said, not unkindly. You and Dad are resourceful. Daniel is a successful lawyer. You'll have to make choices, the same way I had to make them 8 years ago. You'll have to learn to live within your means. Your real means. But come home, Alara, she pleaded, a desperate edge to her voice. Please. We can fix this. Your father, he's ashamed. I know he is. We miss you. I miss you. I looked out the open doors to where Leo was now chasing a small sandpiper along the water's edge, his laughter carried back to me on the breeze. That was my home now. I love you, Mom, I said, and I meant it. But my home is here now with Leo. If you and Dad and Daniel want a relationship with me, it has to be a new one. It has to be one where you see me, all of me. The door is open, but the terms have changed. I won't be your problem to solve or your secret to keep ever again. After we hung up, I stood at the counter for a long time, watching my son play in the surf. I felt tears tracking down my cheeks, but for the first time, they weren't tears of pain or anger. They were tears of release. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift, slowly and awkwardly, like the turning of a great, rusty ship. My father sent a postcard. It was a picture of a lighthouse on the Oregon coast. On the back, in his cramped, unfamiliar handwriting, were 5 words: "We are proud of you." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was a start. Daniel called once, his voice stiff with a new, unpracticed humility. He didn't ask for money. He asked about Leo. He asked, haltingly, about the Larkspur Collective. It was the first time he had ever shown a genuine interest in my life. My mother and I spoke every few days. Our conversations were tentative, exploring the new terrain of our relationship. She told me they had put the boat up for sale and were meeting with a financial advisor. She told me she was proud of me, her voice thick with emotion. She was learning to see the daughter she had, not the one she had expected. Here in Kauai, my life bloomed. The Haven Project launched its first grant cycle, and the applications poured in, stories of resilience and hope from women across the country. My days were full of purpose, my evenings filled with the profound peace of the ocean. Sometimes, when Leo is asleep and the moon casts a silver path across the water, I think about that simple word I spoke as I walked out of my father's house: all right. It was the quietest declaration of independence, a promise I made to myself to stop waiting for permission to be worthy. I live now, not as someone's daughter or someone's disappointment, but as my own creation, imperfect, whole, and finally, breathtakingly free. And here, in my house of light and air, with the ocean whispering that I am, and have always been enough, I finally believe it.